Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm very glad to be joined today by Dr. Marta Benito Gomez for today's webinar, Attachment and Biobehavioral Catch-Up, Cultural Responsive Efforts to Support Latino Families and Home Visitors. As everyone keeps joining, I'll go ahead and start today just addressing a few points before we start the presentation itself. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge that this presentation was completed by Dr. Marta Benito Gomez through the National Hispanic and Latino MHTTC network as Mental Health Technology and Transfer Center. That is the network I work with as a training content specialist. And this is under a cooperative agreement with the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, SAMHSA. And all the materials in this publication, except from that taken directly from copyright resources, is in the public domain and may be reproduced or copied without permission from SAMHSA or the author here. But we do appreciate that you cite if you want to use the content. Really appreciate it. So at the MHTTC network, we always look to use affirming, respectful, and recovery-oriented language in all of our activities, including this webinar today. And here you see some of the language that we will refer to when we refer to this affirming, respectful, and recovery-oriented language. We believe that words matter, and we take that into account as we do our presentations. So I would like to formally introduce today's presenter, Dr. Marta Benito Gomez is a research associate in the Families and Children Policy area at MDRC. She closely collaborates with the Attachment and Biobehavioral Catch-Up ABC program at the University of Delaware, where she completed her postdoctoral fellowship. She received her doctoral and master's degree in human development and family studies from the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, and her bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of Santiago de Compostela, Spain. Dr. Benito Gomez is a trainer and supervisor of the ABC intervention and coordinates cultural adaptations of ABC to diverse contexts and efforts directed towards supporting bilingual parents, coaches. She is interested in dissemination, implementation, and cultural adaptation of evidence-based programs that support children and their families, in particular those from low-income communities facing multiple adversities. Thank you. And can we go to the next slide? Thank you. So just a few housekeeping items before we begin. During this webinar, if you have any technical issues, and if you're having tech, please just individually message me. See my name, Eric Senior, in the question section at the bottom of your screen. We can use that sections tab both to contact me directly, and I'll try to keep monitoring that so I can assist you. If throughout the presentation, at the moment of the QA questions and answers sections, you can also use that questions sections tab at the bottom of the screen as well. And any comments, answers, questions you may have for Dr. Benito Gomez, you can direct them through there. And we'll also be sharing a handout in PDF format through the handout section tab. That should already be there if for your use. You can go ahead and also download that to keep track of the presentation and for your personal use in the future. Before we start with the learning objectives today, we'd like to do a series of poll questions just to see where we're at in terms of the content. We'll do this right now at the beginning of the webinar, and we'll do it again at the end. So I'll go ahead and pull that up for everyone. I'm going to launch it and give you a few minutes to answer. And that first question is, which of the following is one of the ABC targets? And you can select one of the following. So as we can see here, 32% of the audience today of you answered nurturance and self-regulation, 25% nurturance and empathy, 44% attachment and empathy. So quite divided there. We'll go out to our next poll question. What is an example of a cultural adaptation of ABC for Latino families? And you can select one of the three. 23% answered change of ABC targets, 14% removal of the in the moment comments, and 63% use of videos in Spanish. And so we'll go now to our last poll question. Which of the following is a culturally responsive effort to support Latino home visitors implementing ABC? Spanish companion guide and supplemental workshop. There are no additional supports or more weekly supervisions. And we see here that most people answer 79% Spanish companion guide and supplemental workshop, 6% there are no additional supports, and 15% more weekly supervisions. Okay, so without further ado, I'll hand it over to Dr. Benito Gomez.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm very excited to be sharing with you a little bit about the ABC program, but more specifically in terms of the different cultural responsive efforts that we have created to make sure we are supporting Latino home visitors and Latino families. So these are our learning objectives today. Even though based on your answers to the questions, I think you are all in a very good position for this conversation. And so my hope is that by the end of our discussion and presentation today, you will be able to describe the Attachment and Biobehavioral Catch-Up intervention, or ABC. That's how I will be referring to it throughout the next hour together. Understand how to balance and maintaining fidelity to the model and culturally and responsive, linguistic responsive home visiting, and also develop an understanding of culturally responsive efforts to support Latino families and home visitors. I will walk you a little bit through the overview of the intervention, where it started, what are some of the exciting effects that we've seen of the intervention in families, where we are right now in the communities, and also more specifically tapping on the work we have conducted with Latino families and home visitors. So ABC started about 25 years ago when Dr. Mary Dosher started to study children's experiences within the foster care system. And her, along with a few researchers, very quickly identified two key problems for children who experience early adversity: attachment and self-regulation. When we say attachment, we mean that relationship between the child and the primary caregiver. And by self-regulation, we mean how well a child can manage their own behaviors and feelings, okay? And we really think of these as foundational skills that are related to so many other aspects of a child's life, and that really will be able to provide the foundation to promote healthy and optimal development. So I'm gonna walk you through how those two areas and how ABC is able to support families in these specific two areas via different targets that we're going to focus on during the intervention. So nurturance is thought to build a strong attachment between caregiver and a child. And research shows that responding to distress quickly and consistently with comfort fosters secure and organized attachments. And so nurturance builds this strong foundation, and responding to distress quickly and consistently will foster this secure, organized attachment. However, not all children ask for nurturance in the same way. Especially for children who experience early adversity, some children will give clear cues for nurturance, but others can turn away from the caregiver or even push away their caregivers, which really makes it very challenging, right? Especially because we know that these child behaviors may be also driving parents' behavior. So it can become very confusing for a caregiver to know what the child may need in that moment. And so the first component of the ABC intervention is to provide nurturance to your child when it's distressed or when it doesn't elicit that nurturance. And because for some of you, the concept of nurturance may be a new one, I wanted to show you a video of how this may look like. Hopefully it works.
My detail, that's great, pulling our clothes. Look at that builder.
So as you saw in that video, that child was crying, was in distress, and immediately as mom recognized that, was able to pick up the child. And you probably noticed that as soon as that child was in mom's arms, the child was able to calm down, was able to regulate, and was able to be like, okay, my mom is here. I'm comforted now. I feel secure. So this would be an example of what I mean when I'm saying nurturance. And really what we will hope that we will work with parents and support them to provide this nurturance to their children. Then we also know that early adversity leads to biological and behavioral dysregulation and emotional dysregulation. And so we aim to affect these areas by changing everyday behaviors when a child is not distressed. And the way we do it is by imitating, describing, and responding the child needs in a contingent way. So when I talk about behavioral or biologically dysregulation, I mean in terms of cortisol, the autonomic nervous system, the disruptive behavior, or even in terms of emotions, anger expression, or even self-soothing strategies. And so parents who follow their children's lead, when they imitate, when they describe, when they're responding to their children in a contingent way, they develop better regulatory capabilities. And so this is our second component of the ABC intervention, following the lead and delighting in your child. Delighting meaning that having joy with your child, smiling to your child. And then finally, we know that frightening behaviors are associated with disorganized attachment. And as I told you earlier, we're really focusing on attachment and self-regulation. And so when children have a caregiver that is providing comfort, but is also the source of frightening behaviors, you can imagine how that can be super confusing for a young child. And so our third component is really avoiding frightening behaviors. We want to make sure that the caregiver is that consistent source of comfort that the child knows that can rely on when they're in distress, when they're worried, when they need to feel secure, right, around their caregiver. So I'm going to show you an example of what following the lead looks like.
Towards your face, you can help her. Beautiful. You see her reaching out for some, and she does, and you nod right with her great finally with the light.
So you see a lot of back and forth in between the child and the mother. You see that this interaction is driven by the child, right? It is, you know, what the child wants to do, how the child wants to play, and mom is responding to that in a way that feels supportive and delighting. They're having both a great time. So in ABC, we'll focus on these three targets: nurturing the child in distress, following the lead and the light, and avoiding intrusive and frightening behaviors. The intervention is quite brief, and so we don't try to kind of tackle many things. We really want to work on these three things with the goal to really have an impact in the attachment relationship, in the self-regulation capabilities of the child. Just to give you a little bit of additional context of the ABC intervention, it's an evidence-based home visiting intervention, and it has 10 sessions Initially was a home visiting in-person intervention, but as many home visiting models, we have to adapt as the result of the pandemic. So we are now offering telehealth options as well. It's a strength-based intervention, and one of the ways in which we do this is by in vivo commenting. In the videos I just showed, you may have noticed there was something commenting on the background, and that is the home visitor or the parent coach, how we call it, making comments about what the child is doing and how mom is responding to that, what mom is already doing that is so good and having such a great impact in her child. We also use videos in which throughout sessions we show the caregiver some of these targets. Maybe an example of mom providing nurturance in that really hard time in which the child was so distressed and wouldn't calm down. It's also evidence-based parenting education, meaning that we have some parts of the sessions in which we will review with the caregiver some research that supports the ideas we're sharing with them and so on. And then it was originally developed for parents of infants between 6 and 24 months of age, but it has been adapted to different ages now to make sure that we can support caregivers and kids from different developmental periods. So MABC goes from 0 to 6 months. So we start working with parents prenatally. We have ABC Infant, which is our original model, goes up to 24 months. And we also have ABC Toddler, which goes from 24 months to 48 months. And we're able to support caregivers in different areas, including how to manage dysregulation, right? Especially in the toddler years. And here you see a brief overview of how these sessions look like and how they are structured in terms of the different themes that they cover. So in session 1 and 2, we start talking about providing nurturance. We discuss with the caregiver those times that it may be very easy and it may be very clear that that's what the child needs, but also those times that maybe it's really challenging to understand what the child needs, or maybe the child may be pushing the caregiver away. In session 3 and 4, we discussed the idea of following the lead and the light. So really responding to the child, to making sure the interaction is child-driven, to describe what the child is doing and responding in that contingent way that I was mentioning earlier. Session 5 focuses on reducing intrusive behaviors and stimulation, and session 6 on reducing frightening behaviors. Then session 7 and 8, we start talking about what we call voices from the past. So these are experiences, maybe how you were raised by your own parents, or maybe even experiences you're going through right now that get in the way sometimes and make it really hard to provide that nurturance for your child or following the lead for your child. And so we help caregivers to not only identify those voices, what is that is getting in the way and making it really hard, but also overriding those voices, meaning that helping them to choose to behave in a different way when they feel that way. And then session 9 and 10 really focus on consolidating changes and celebrating. In fact, by the end of session 10, since we have been recording the sessions, we create a video with different clips from the last 10 sessions to really celebrate that growth and their strengths. In the moment comments, so this is what I meant with the in vivo comments. This is what we consider to be the active ingredient of ABC, or what we call it sometimes the magic sauce of ABC. And they aim to really reinforce the behavior that the parent is doing in the moment. And so we have different components that go within these comments. The first one is describing the behavior. So really describing what is the child doing and how is the parent responding to that. So for example, oh, when he fell down, you pick him right back up. So that will be a description of a parent who is engaging in nurturance. In addition to describing the behavior, we can also label the ABC target. That's a beautiful example of nurturance. When we do that, we're connecting not only what the parent was doing, but also what was that, right? That's nurturance. We've been talking so much about that. And then the third component is to connecting that target or that behavior with a long-term outcome. That will help him learn to trust others as he gets older. So not only telling the caregiver what is she doing or what is he doing, but also what is the impact that she is having in the moment to his or her child. So there's different ways in which you can do them. You can combine different components, but that's kind of like the general structure that we are looking for, and also the structure that we know it works. And then finally, there may be times in which the caregiver is not nurturing. The child is crying and the caregiver is just being dismissive of that. We have advanced comments in which we aim to support the caregiver and change the parent behavior by making some suggestions and really supporting the caregiver in that moment. So for example, we may say, she looks upset, you could try picking her up and holding her. So just guiding the caregiver in that difficult moment and helping them to connect that this may be one of those times that you need to be there for your child. And we see, as I was saying, that the more high quality comments that include these three components lead to more parent behavior change. And we have seen this in several studies we have conducted. Some of you may be wondering, okay, what are some of the effects you found in your studies? So we know that ABC works, and even for the long term, meaning that a lot of the changes we've seen in children's developmental outcomes has been sustained over time. So here are a few of the findings we've seen in the different randomized clinical trials we have conducted in the ABC lab. So in infancy, we have seen changes in attachment, in cortisol production and regulation, and some of these effects, as you can see, are also in early childhood, middle childhood, and then some kids who received the ABC intervention when they were infants are now 15, and we have been following them up. So we're hoping to have findings about the effects of ABC in adolescents soon enough. I think a few of the findings that would be good to highlight are related to attachment. So for example, here you can see that after the intervention, children who receive ABC compared to the children who received the control intervention had more organized attachments. Here we have some findings around cortisol and brain activity. I don't want to overwhelm you too much with this, but briefly here you can see that children involved in ABC show more normative levels of the stress hormone cortisol, and this was maintained 3 years after ABC participation, after they received the intervention, meaning that a lot of the times we see that kids who experience early adversity, they just show not normative or regulated patterns of regulate cortisol, which is the stress hormone. And so we saw that for those who received ABC, they got back to those normative levels. And on the right, we can see some of our effects on brain activation. And so 8 years after participation in ABC, children show greater brain activation toward their parent, which in fact resulted in less behavioral problems. So a lot of cool stuff. On the slides, you have links to all the studies and all the different findings if you want to learn a little bit more about it. And so as we were seeing that the intervention was really having such a beautiful and positive impact on children's developmental outcomes, it was time to bring the intervention to the communities, right? And so I would like to show you where our dissemination to the community has been so far. So here you can see where ABC is being implemented around the world, not only in North America, but also in South Africa, Russia, Taiwan, Germany, Norway, Sweden, and Australia. And then here you can see where we are in the US. So about 25 states and many coaches who have been certified, many who are in training, and thousands of families who have benefited from receiving ABC, and many more that I hope they will. But when you bring an intervention from, you know, a very high control context, like such as a lab and a randomized clinical control trial, to the community, it can be really hard, right? How do we make it in a way that we know it's been implemented in the way we know it works? And so for ABC, these are some of the things that we have been doing. We select very carefully the parent coaches who will be implementing ABC by conducting a screener, really just to assess fit of the parent coach with the intervention. And also in terms of education background, any individual can be trained in ABC. There's no any requirements. Then there's a training and certification process that you go through, so you can really you know, learn the intervention but receive supervision until you get certified. And that's when fidelity comes into place. So we really believe that fidelity is one of the key things that makes ABC implementation in the community to be successful. And so we do 2 different types of supervision to make sure that the way ABC is implemented in the community is as effective and in the way that we know it works. So parent coaches receive 2 different types of supervisions weekly. The first one is clinical supervision, in which they think more broadly about the clinical conceptualizations and some of the challenges, but also successes that may happen when you're implementing ABC. And then the other type of supervision focuses more in terms of the in-the-moment comments that I was referring to earlier. So this is actually how that supervision looks like and what we make our parent coaches do. Coaches have to record each session, and then from that session, their supervisors select a 5-minute clip that is randomly selected. And they are gonna code, I know this word is like, you're coding what? So we're gonna code what the caregiver is doing, but also we're gonna code the parent coach's comments. And that's a great way for us to see if the way they're making the comments are the way we know they work and they lead to parent behavioral change. But also, as a parent coach, it's very helpful because it helps you realize whether you're making the way the comments you should be making. And so throughout these supervision meetings and this codification system and fidelity monitorization, we believe that's key in the community implementation of ABC and to really implement ABC in the way we know it works. Some of you may be wondering, well, so you show me some findings from the randomized clinical trials. What do we see when you bring it to the community? And here are some findings of the community. You can see changes from pre-intervention and post-intervention, and we see that sensitivity increases, intrusiveness decreases, and delight increases a little bit. And we also have found similar effects in telehealth, which is very, very exciting. knowing that even if it's not in the homes, we can still support many caregivers and families. And I wanted to switch gears now that we hopefully have a little bit of a better understanding of the ABC intervention to really think about Latino families who receive home visiting services. So according to the National Home Visiting Resource Center, in 2021, roughly 300,000 families engage in evidence-based home visiting services. About 30% identify as Hispanic or Latino, and 15% indicated that their primary language was Spanish. However, even though we see that there's such a need of home visiting services in Spanish, there's a lot of challenges because there's a lot of inequities in the quality and access to services. And a lot of times there's no translations or cultural adaptations to interventions for Spanish-speaking families. Sometimes there's also no workforce capacity of bilingual providers, right? And so that makes it all very, very challenging. So how can we best serve Spanish-speaking families? So the first way is to making sure we bring equity and quality of and access to services, but also that we are providing the supports that Spanish-speaking providers need. A lot of the time, they're just asked to translate this and go into the home and implement this intervention in the best way you can. And so how can we really make sure that families and home visitors are receiving the support they need for a successful experience? And some of you may be familiar with this or may feel like reflected as I'm talking about this. And it's really not easy because there are many ways in which we can adapt these interventions to implement with diverse communities. But it's really important that we balance fidelity to the model with a culturally sensitive adaptation of the intervention, okay? And not really just translating, right? Really going beyond that, making sure that is responsive to the culture, that celebrates the culture, and that is sensitive to the experiences and needs to these families. We know that adaptations promote engagement, participation, and really play a positive role in the outcomes resulting for the intervention. So it really is very important that we are culturally sensitive to the culture and to the context in which the families who are receiving ABC are embedded. So in order to accomplish that, we developed this roadmap to culturally responsive implementation of ABC. And I'll be just focusing for the purposes of this talk on the linguistic and cultural adaptation pieces, but I think this gives you, a little glance of how complex this process it is. And we really think about it as a process that relies on a strong collaborative partnership, both with home visitors, community partners, with families, and it's also iterative process, meaning that we're gonna be going back and forth and making changes until we have this culturally adapted ABC intervention that we know is responsive to these families. So I'm going to give you some examples of what we've done specific to Spanish and Latino families. So for example, in terms of the linguistic adaptation, a lot of the times we see that people just translate things from English to Spanish. And then we end up with these translations that not even Spanish speakers understand, right? So the idea is to conduct what is called a functional approach, which is making sure that the translation conveys the concepts in the English manual as best as possible. So really trying to avoid literal word-for-word translation. And that's, it can be easily reflected in the way, for example, the ABC targets were translated. For some of you who are Spanish speakers, nurturance, how do we even translate nurturance, right? There's really not a word. So you really need to think about what word or group of words can we use that really convey the conceptual meaning of nurturance, but in Spanish. And then when we are talking about translation of manual content, of some of the resources that we have for home visitors, making sure that we are consistent with colloquial and vernacular language, but also with the terms that may be used in the field more broadly. And then when thinking about cultural adaptations, this process should be knowledge-driven and really guided by conversations and consultations with ABC champions, community partners, parent coaches, and families. And as you see, we think about it in kind of like different levels of adaptations. The first one, that is the one that I will be mostly discussing today, is cultural attunement or cultural enhancement. So this may rely on changing some colloquial examples, the activities, the videos, to make sure that are more attuned to Latino families. We could also consider if we want to make minor cultural adaptations. So maybe we want to really change some of the content so it's more specific to Latino families. And then finally, we have deep cultural adaptations, which that will involve really changing one of the core components of the intervention. But if we do that, we will basically changing the whole intervention. So we may need to reconsider, right, if that's what we're looking for here. So these are some of the things that we have done in the ABC intervention to make sure we're culturally responsive to Latino families. And so, for example, as I was saying, we share some research about some studies that have been conducted that relate to nurturance or the idea of following the lead. And so we make sure that the language we use is easy to understand, but we frame it in a way that is responsive to the Latino culture, and we connect it with some cultural values. An easy cultural adaptation that we have done is changing the activities that we do, or even some of the examples. So for example, for practicing following the lead, we bring pudding to families' homes, and we ask them to do pudding with their kids. And we know pudding, when things are getting messy, when there's like specific instructions that you have to follow, we know that's very likely to pull from some intrusive behaviors. So it creates a great opportunity for us to make comments and practice following the lead. But for Latino families, the use of pudding may not be something that is part of their regular activities. So instead of doing pudding, they make tortillas. And so that is something that is responsive and that families may be able to connect better with. Also, we make sure that we have videos in which not only they speak Spanish, but they are also from Hispanic ethnic backgrounds, and when we're showing those videos to the families, they feel reflected, they connect, right, and they feel identified with the videos that we're showing them. Some of the coaches I've worked with, they bring traditional music to their sessions, or they put videos with some of that music. And then throughout the sessions, the way we discuss some of the targets, we make sure we integrate conversations about cultural values in children's socialization goals to make sure that we are implementing ABC in the context of Latino families. And then in terms of some of the additional culturally responsive efforts that we have conducted specific for home visitors, we now offer training for supervisors that is fully in Spanish. We are also increasing workforce capacity of clinical supervisors for coaches who implement ABC in Spanish. A lot of the times, home visitors find themselves implementing a model in Spanish by receiving supervision in English. So that makes it really hard to get the most out of that supervision. So making sure that parent coaches who are implementing ABC in Spanish also receive supervision in Spanish or by clinical supervisors who are bilingual, it's extremely important. We also developed a companion guide in a Spanish support group in collaboration with Power of Two, one of our community partners in New York City, to really provide that extra support for home visitors. And I will share a little bit more in a second. And finally, we have these supplemental workshops for home visitors working with Spanish-speaking families. They really all highlight the need to build in equitable training and supervision and making sure that both families and home visitors have the same level of resources, but also high quality service as those who are implemented in another language. And so these are some of the things that we included in the ABC Manual Spanish Companion Guide. So we included glossary translations. We know that the Spanish language is so diverse, and you may find yourself serving families from so many different backgrounds. So this glossary is very helpful to make sure you can use some language or vocabulary depending on who is the family and where they're from. We also have a side-by-side comparison of the English and Spanish manuals, which is very helpful, especially for those home visitors who are bilingual but don't feel as competent in Spanish. And then making sure we have some questions and activities to reflect on the role of culture and making sure they have opportunities to practice. And so in addition of the companion guide, we provide this supplemental workshop to kind of put all that together and practice it. So these workshops really creates a space to support and practice content delivery in Spanish. But I think mostly it provides a context to develop a sense of community, to share challenges, to address some cultural things that may happen, and really develop like a network of home visitors who implement ABC in Spanish. And I wanted to share with you some of the feedback they share with us after conducting these workshops. So, for example, she's not feeling alone in different challenges I face. I build a network of support to lean on when I have questions. Use more variety and be aware of differences between different countries where Spanish is the first language. Gave me ideas of how to culturally be congruent. For example, doing the making tortillas activity instead of pudding. So these are just a few examples of how integrating these efforts and making sure that not only families have have access to services that are culturally responsive and in their language, that they feel most comfortable speaking with, but also making sure that we provide additional support for those home visitors who are delivering these services. So this hopefully gives you a few ideas that you may want to try or implement in your work. I think we should have time now for some questions. I'm also leaving here my contact information. Feel free to email me for any additional questions, or if you have, any interest about the program, I'm always happy to talk about it. And I'll leave it. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Benito. Thank you for that wonderful presentation and content, really instructive. As we go ahead to the Q&A, some of the questions we have from the audience members, before we do, I would just like to remind everyone that we really appreciate is, as we get into the questions, if you can fill out that evaluation. It's really our way to get such great speakers for your service and to bring it to you all. So I also share if the QR code doesn't work, I will share the evaluation link through the chat as well. You should be receiving it soon. So yeah, let me go ahead and read some questions, and so you have the chance to answer. So one first question is, what is your translation, I guess, in Spanish for nurturance?
Yes, I should have said it. I would say before I answer that I welcome any suggestions you may have, because we've been going back and forth so much, because it really is challenging. There's not such a thing. So the translation we're using now is dar cariño y atención, because we really want to focus on making sure we tap not only in the parent responding to the child that is stressed, but also on the emotional connection that goes with that response. So right now we're using dar cariño y atención. And we've asked families about that and whether that's something that they feel comfortable with. We ask home visitors if that's they're choosing, or if they have any other suggestions, or if they found themselves using a different term. So far, we haven't found anything better. Yeah.
Great, thank you. We have another question around translation, which could you elaborate on important aspects to remember while developing a culturally appropriate translation?
Yes. So you want to make sure that you have experts that speak the language, but that are also familiar with the colloquial expressions and vernacular language that are used within the community that you are bringing that translation, or you're translating the intervention for. You also want to make sure that you're going back and forth, right? You may have to do several rounds of translating the same content because new things may come up. You may want to ask the families if this is something that makes sense for them, or even whoever you are working with. You could also rely on experts from the field who have maybe conducted work with those communities. They may give you some input. So those are kind of like some general steps. And I would say, that's kind of like the take-home message. There's not going to be just one step of I'm going to translate this and then I'm going to go to the community. It may have different steps until you have that translation that really fits for that community. And especially, speaking of Spanish, since there's so much diversity in language, you may still need to make some changes depending on the community you're serving.
Thank you. And so we have a few questions on translation. I guess the last answer may answer a bit about this question, but I'll address it as well. How is the content addressed if the person does not speak English or Spanish? I guess a broader question.
Yeah, so we have translated ABC, the manual to different languages. I think because we mostly serve English or Spanish speakers, a lot of our efforts have focused on Latino families, and also because that's something I feel very passionate about. But we've done similar work in, for example, Sweden or other countries that are non-English speakers. And so we follow the same process as I just shared with the Spanish-speaking families. So making sure that we're not literally translating word by word, but that we're actually translating the meaning we're trying to convey and relying on other resources such as conversations with experts, talking directly to families, and reading the literature and seeing what are the words that will make more sense or things like that. Now, I'm happy to share resources if people are interested in this topic. Yeah, feel free to email me.
Well, I'll read here a comment from one of our audience members before we go back to the poll questions. I'd like to do that before we head off. From Priscilla Terna, I think it is so insightful providing the home visitor with copies of manuals in English and Spanish. I facilitate a group of women who are pregnant and are receiving their prenatal care in a group modality. And since my academic and schooling is in English, but the group is offered in Spanish, and I refer to the English manual constantly. Thank you for that comment. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's always, especially because the training for these home visitors is always or mostly in Spanish. And so then you're throwing to them to not only going to the homes and implementing in Spanish, but if there's no additional supports, it makes it really hard it's kind of like we're asking them to do that extra step. So yeah, I really encourage to either having that back and forth, side to side manual, or having those additional supports and opportunities to create that space to practice, to discuss, to share challenges, share successes.
Great, thank you. So if we're going to go back to the last slide, I would just like to mention to the audience that the National Hispanic and Latino Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, we have a Facebook and YouTube page, where I encourage you to check out and subscribe. We have many different resources and other providers, other experts, as Dr. Marta Benito Gomez, also speaking of issues related to mental health with Hispanic and Latino communities, both in school-based settings and adult settings. So we would gladly want you to share those resources and use them for yourselves. I guess we have some time now to go over the poll questions we did at the beginning, so you all can go ahead and give them a try to answer them again. Here we go. Let's see. Well, apparently I have a technical issue with the poll and won't be able to share it again. I'm sorry about that, but if for those of you who want to review the content and the material, again, I would encourage you to also use the handout that we shared in case you need it for future references. And with that being said, I would like to thank once again Dr. Benito Gomez for joining us, for sharing such thoughtful, insightful, and really practical and well-delivered information and knowledge. And we appreciate it a lot. And thank you all for joining as well, and for doing the important work you are doing with Hispanic Latino families.
Thank you.
All the best to all. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.